Good evening. My name is Colonel Art Athens, and I have the honor of serving as the director of the Vice Admiral Stockdale Center for Ethical Leadership here at the Naval Academy. And I'd like to welcome you to the 2011 Moral Courage Lecture that is sponsored by the class of 1964. And members of the class of 1964 that are with us, we want to say thank you. Admiral Miller, we thank you for being here. Captain Clark, Command Master Chief, and other members of the senior leadership team and distinguished guests. The purpose of the Moral Courage Lecture is to have an evening to reflect on the unremitting responsibility we have as professional officers to demonstrate moral courage every day, in every situation, to do what's right no matter what the cost. Our guest speaker tonight is an extraordinary leader and a man of moral courage on the battlefield, in garrison, in the halls of Washington, D.C. General Peter Pace, United States Marine Corps retired, is a 1967 graduate of the Naval Academy. He served in every position in command, from platoon commander all the way up to chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff. It all started with 2nd Platoon, Golf Company, 2nd Battalion, 5th Marines, and culminated in the 16th chair of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, the first Marine to ever hold that position. In 2008, he received the Presidential Medal of Freedom, which is the highest civilian honor America bestows on one of its citizens. He's currently serving on the board of directors of several corporations and is a member of the Secretary of Defense's Defense Policy Board. Additionally, General Pace lends his talents, time, and energies to a number of organizations that make a difference for our military members and their families. But perhaps we learn best about the heart and soul of General Pace when we hear the words of President Bush during the Medal of Freedom presentation on 19 June 2008. President Bush concluded his remarks that day by telling the following story about General Pace. And this is what President Bush said. On his final day in uniform, General Pace took a quiet journey to the Vietnam Veterans Memorial. He searched the names engraved in the sleek granite and then found a spot where he placed his 4 stars that had adorned his uniform. Along with those stars, he attached notes addressed to the men who died under his first command some 40 decades ago. The notes, each one of them, said the following: "These," meaning the 4 stars, "these are yours, not mine. With love and respect, your platoon leader, Pete Pace." President Bush would go on to say General Pace ended his military career the same way he began it, with love for his country and devotion to his fellow Marines. Now that is an extraordinary leader. Ladies and gentlemen, please join me in welcoming the former chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, General Peter Pace.
Thank you. Thank you. Art, Colonel, thank you for the kind words. Admiral Miller, Captain Clark, thanks very much for letting me talk to your mids. I appreciate the opportunity. This is going to do more for me than it will for you, I guarantee you that. Class of 1964, thank you very much for all you do year in and year out to support the leadership and ethical and moral training of the mids. And I hate to admit it, but thanks too for a instructive plebe year. There are a couple of these guys I wanted to kill about 40 years ago. I've been asked to talk to you a little bit about leadership, ethics, morality. But before I do that, I would really be remiss if I didn't say to you, thank you. It's been almost 10 years since we were attacked. By my math, most of you were 8, 9, 10 years old at the time. It was one thing, as Colonel Haddock pointed out to me today coming over here, it was one thing in September of 2001 to run to the recruiting office. It's another thing 10 years later to do what you've done, which is to volunteer to serve your country. knowing full well what has happened so far, and knowing full well that it will be a long time before we can declare victory and live at peace. I know you don't think about it every day, but you have committed yourself to an incredibly worthy cause. And I'm proud to stand here with you. And I sincerely wish I could wear an active duty uniform and serve beside you. But you don't need me. You're going to do just great. I'm going to talk a little bit about leadership, but I want to preface it by saying anybody who thinks they are a good leader, anybody who thinks they are an ethical leader, anybody who thinks they are a moral leader probably isn't. And I don't mean that glibly. I just mean that ethics and morality and leadership are things you have to think about and do something positively about every single day. And equally important is that leadership for me is going to be different than leadership for you. Yeah, the principles are the same. And you should look at leaders who you admire and want to emulate. And by all means, do the things to others that you have liked them doing to you. But understand that sometimes things that work for other leaders just simply aren't going to work for you. Personalities are different. So try the things that you like and understand that maybe it's not going to work for you. Example, I like it when somebody comes up to me, puts their arm around me and says, "Hey, Pete, how you doing?" Because I like it, I've tried it. It works for me. It makes me feel close to the person I'm trying to talk to. But if you've ever had somebody put their arm around you and try to hug you who didn't want to do it, it's like magnets repelling, and you know it. And instead of being a reinforcing leadership trait, it turns out to be something totally different. So try it. Put together your own chemistry set, so to speak. Listen and learn and try things. And don't be afraid to take things off your plate and leave them for somebody else. You also ought to have a heavy dose of humility when it comes to talking about leadership and ethics. And I hope that I bring that with me tonight. I'm going to tell you a story that I know for a fact I've never said publicly before. Not because I was hiding it, it's just because I never thought about saying it. But I thought about it on the way over here tonight. When I was a third-class mid like you guys, first of all, I was just pleased that nobody was yelling at me anymore. Does that sound about right? Yeah. And I wasn't yet a second classman or a first classman, so I kind of had this void. And I didn't realize then, and you probably don't realize now, that you really are in a leadership position right now. When you're in 1,000 folks in one place, it's hard to think of yourself as an individual leader. But the way you wear your uniform, the way you study, the way you perform whatever it is you do every day impacts the folks on the left and the right of you. It impacts your classmates. And you are leading today in a very real way. But when I was a third-class mid, don't know why, but both of my roommates decided they were going to start smoking pipes. I watched this for about a week, and I wanted to be part of the family, so to speak. So I went down to the mid store, bought a pipe. It was $5.50. I paid for it with a $10 bill. There were no credit cards back then. I went back to my room, and I sat there for about 2 or 3 days looking at this pipe and saying to myself, why are you doing this? You don't even like to smoke. So I took the pipe back down to the mid-store and was going to trade it back in for my $10 bill, right? I don't remember all the specifics. I should, but I don't. But for some reason, while I was down there, I decided I'm going to keep it. So I go back to my room. 2 days later, I get called down to the commandant's office. No offense, Captain Clark, but that was not something I wanted to do. Okay. And the commandant of midshipmen, I report into him, and he says to me, "You have been accused of stealing a pipe from the midshipman store." I will fast forward through the several weeks of pain and agony, but I will tell you that because there were no receipts, because we didn't do business then like we do now, I had no way of proving that yes, I had been in the midshipman store with the pipe in my hand. Yes, I had walked out without paying for it that day, but I had paid for it 3 days before. My stomach was a wreck. My brother was in the class of 65. And he came to me. He was a firstie. And he said, "Pete, I love you. If you stole that pipe, you have got to stand up and admit it. And if you did not steal that pipe, then you need to stand your ground, and I'm with you." I really do not know how this thing might have turned out, except for what happened the day after. One of my classmates was a guy named John Griffin. He was our third class company commander. And John saw that I was upset and said to me, "What's the problem?" And I told John that I'd been accused of stealing a pipe. And he said, "You mean the pipe that I saw you with?" And he mentioned the day before the day that I supposedly stole it. And I said, "John, are you sure that you saw me with that?" And he said, "I'm positive because we were doing this, we were studying for this test, John went and saw the company officer, told him what he had seen. I was exonerated. But there was about a month of my life where I really thought that I was going to be shown the door because I had no way to prove myself. But what I took away from that was that if you trust, if you are in fact in the right, if you have not done anything wrong, then trust yourself and trust the people around you. As a result of that, quite honestly, I've been more lenient on more people than I should have been. Every time some PFC stood in front of me and swore up and down that he didn't do whatever it was he didn't do, I tended to believe him. I'm not sorry I did. Because when you're a leader, you can always show some leniency. If they deserve to be shown the leniency, you'll feel great about having been the leader who gave it to them. And if they don't deserve to be shown the leniency, they'll show themselves again, and you can kill them then. And I would tell people, I don't know what's right and what's wrong. I'm going to give you a break. If you show up in front of me again, I will be ruthless. And I was. But I feel good about the fact that more often than not, whoever it was, regardless of whether or not they had done something wrong in the first place, squared themselves away. I tell you that because that incident, although I've never spoken about it publicly before that I can remember, has influenced me every single day of my life whenever things got to the point where I didn't have enough information. As a leader, I always wanted to have as much information as I could get. And it taught me that except when you're actually in combat, that you need to take and should take as much time as you need to make leadership decisions. Don't let anybody force you into making a snap judgment. God bless that commandant of midshipmen. I can't even remember his name, shame on me. He could have rushed to judgment. He didn't. I don't know what he was thinking in his heart of hearts until John Griffin told him the truth. But he gave me the opportunity to set things right. While you're sitting in this environment, you don't often think, I presume, about moral compass, your moral compass. You should. You should set it right now if you haven't already. While you're here, there are tests and all kinds of things that you could cheat on. There's raging hormones between guys and gals. There's all kinds of stuff going on. Your moral compass is what keeps you straight. Now, I thought I had one, and I'm just going to use a couple of examples, because they've asked me to, from my time on active duty. When I was a lieutenant in Vietnam, we were on patrol. And an incredible young Marine named Lance Corporal Guido Farinaro from Bethpage, New York, 19 years old, born in Italy, naturalized citizen of the US, was shot by a sniper right in the chest. I was holding Guido when he died, and I was absolutely enraged. Now, I had heard all the stories about people supposedly cutting off ears and doing things in combat that, weren't right. And I knew I would never allow myself or any of my Marines to ever do anything immoral or unethical in combat. When Guido died, I was enraged. I called in an artillery strike on the village from which the sniper round was fired. As you know, it takes a little while between the time you call for fire and you get it. During that time, my platoon sergeant, who was an E5 sergeant, but he was on his second tour in Vietnam, didn't say anything to me. He just looked at me. I could tell by the way he was looking at me that what I was doing was wrong. I mean, it just confirmed what I already knew in my heart of hearts. I called off the artillery strike before it was fired. We did what we should have done in the first place, which was to sweep through the village on foot. Go figure, we found nothing but women and children. I don't know how I could live with myself if we had done what I almost did. The point is, the time to set your moral compass is not when your best buddy gets shot, is not when your wingman gets shot down. You will be morally challenged when you are least emotionally prepared to deal with it. Every day since, I have thought about who I am. I got my platoon together that day and apologized to them for almost doing what I almost did. And then every day since then, I have just thought through what's going to happen today that might be a moral challenge, an ethical challenge. 99.9% of the time, the things I could think of never happened. But it got me into a routine of thinking about who I am, so that when things that I hadn't thought about happened, I was able to take the 2 to 3 seconds, that's all it takes, the 2 to 3 seconds to think about, is this who I am, before executing. When you take 2 to 3 seconds and somebody senior to you is looking at you, it feels like an eternity to yourself, especially when your boss is saying, go do this. it feels like an eternity to you. To them, it looks like you're thinking, which is not a bad thing. You've already made some very fundamental moral decisions. You've already made the decision that although it is immoral to kill, it is right to defend yourself, your country, and your countrymen. You've already made that decision. You wouldn't be wearing that uniform if you hadn't. Fast forward to being a lieutenant colonel. It's not always about morals. Sometimes it's about having courage, and I don't mean to pretend like I have got a lot of courage, but I do believe there's a different kind of courage than physical courage. I've watched incredibly brave acts in combat and hoped that faced with the same kind of physical challenge that I would have performed as well as those Marines performed in combat. But I've also watched what I know to be Marines who deserve the medals on their chest fold like cheap suitcases in the face of discussions, ideas. Somebody saying, this is where we're going. This is how we're going to do it. The person who has the moral courage to say, I see it differently and here's why, is worth their weight in gold. If you will say that, you will not always be right, but you'll always be invited back to the next meeting. Because leaders need other leaders thinking, asking questions, saying, I see it differently. Now, I don't want to stand up in front of a beer truck and get you run over. I know right now you are discussing dissent and disobedience. You have an absolute responsibility to dissent. You have a responsibility to dissent and dissent and dissent as long as you believe that the course that's about to be taken is wrong. Once the decision is made, you now have a responsibility to execute that order to the best of your ability, unless the order is either illegal or immoral. Let's take the dissent piece first. I said I didn't want to stand up in front of a beer truck so you could get hit. When you're the junior person in the room, it usually isn't a successful tactic. It's not usually a successful tactic to say to your boss, I disagree. Now we got the testosterone and the estrogen levels ramping up. And guess what? Major Pace is always going to beat Captain Pace in that game, if you put the challenge out there like that. Okay? I have learned, I did it as a lieutenant, I did it as a 4-star chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff with the President of the United States. Ask questions. You could say something like, you know, if you hadn't said it that way, sir, I was thinking this. Can you educate me about the difference there? You haven't said, I disagree. You hadn't had to made the admiral stand up and prove he's an admiral, or the general prove he's a general. You've said, I don't understand, educate me. When you do that, you have been true to your responsibility to dissent, but you've done it in a way that actually allows your dissent to be heard. If you ask for an education, if you're me, you're going to get the education you ask for. But every once in a while, guess what? You're right. And now you've given your boss the opportunity to say, hey, Pete, you're exactly right. But you haven't put down some kind of a challenge on the deck that they've either got to walk around or step on. If asking questions doesn't work, you can try another approach. You can say no by saying yes. How do you do that? Say, Pete, I want you to go do this. Yes, sir. I can and I will if you want this to be the outcome. As best I can see, if I do this, this will be what will happen. And if that's the result you want, I'm on it. Again, dissent without setting up confrontation. Sooner or later, though, your boss is going to make a decision. Once they've made a decision, it's time to execute. Now, I will tell you this. If they've made their decision, and it's not illegal, and it's not immoral, but you still think it's dumb, and that's possible, go to them in private and walk in and say, sir, ma'am, I know you're going to chew my ass when this is all over, but I owe you and I owe this unit one more shot at this. And if after you listen to me, you tell me, Pete, go do it, I will shut up and I'll go do it. But I owe it to you and to me and to the guys and gals to say whatever. If somebody is anywhere near being a decent leader, they will appreciate that. Seniors know how hard it is for a subordinate to swallow their tongue and walk in and say, hey, your subordinates deserve that from you. You deserve it from you, and your boss deserves it from you, so go do it. If they still say, yep, got it, hear you, but I got a different opinion, and we're going to do it my way, fair enough. And that now boils down to you will execute unless it is either illegal or immoral. And the illegal piece is actually fairly simple to figure out. It's either the law of the land or it's not. It's either accepted or it's not. The immoral piece is much more difficult because the immoral piece is all about you, your church, your family, your schooling, your ethnicity, the country in which you grew up. All those things craft for you your moral background. And each of us is a little bit different. But each of us has that feeling in our stomach when we know that this is not right. If you believe that an order is immoral, you have a moral obligation to disobey the immoral order. Now, after 40 plus years in uniform, I can count on one hand the number of times when I thought I was facing that kind of situation. So the probability of having to actually make that kind of decision is very, very rare. But you should have in your head as a leader that you are ready, willing, and able to make that decision. For me, when